All the rolling go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today, before we start the show, I would like to bring up some business things that have kind of been on my mind so that you can know where to get more Where Am I to Go. First off, I'd like to talk about the Facebook page at Where Am I to Go podcast. It's on Facebook, and we've been posting some wonderful pictures of some of the places that we've been and some of the adventures that we've had. Not everything that we go and do is made into a podcast, and so we take pictures at different places and post those pictures so that you guys can enjoy some of the different places we've been. Also, I really am interested in listener feedback. I have an email address at whereamiitogopodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is whereamiitogopodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear some of the listeners' comments and some of their ideas of places that might be interesting to visit and go and do. Today we are in Clarkdale, Arizona, which is close to Jerome and close to Cottonwood, and Sedona. Yeah, everybody knows where Sedona is. And we are at the Copper Museum. This museum I visited a few years back. I was blown away by copper, I guess you could say. So I called Drake and asked him if it would be okay if we came and did a podcast here. He said it definitely would. So we are here with Drake, and we are about ready to learn about copper and a lot of other cool stuff. So welcome, Drake.
Hi, Loren.
Start off with, we are kind of in a super pretty part of Arizona. It's in the mountains. You guys have a lot of history here and some of that. Tell us about the area a little bit.
Yeah, the Verde Valley is mainly north central Arizona. And we're lucky we have a flowing river called the Verde River right down the road, and it flows all year. But the scenery around here is absolutely gorgeous with Sedona and towns like Jerome, Arizona, where you can see for miles, 50 miles and whatnot.
Oh, coming off that pass from Prescott is just unbelievable.
Yeah,
and then you get into Jerome, we're driving a rather large rig, and the roads are extremely narrow, but it's a beautiful area here.
Yes, it is very beautiful. Most people think of Arizona as tumbleweeds and puddles and, a lot of dust, but this area is not. You can go up the mountain here and you'll be in the tall pines. You can come down and you'll be in the high desert.
And your elevation here is what?
We're at about 3,500 feet.
Well, that's not too bad.
That's about 5/8 of a mile or so.
Yeah. So you guys get lots of snow in that here?
Not so much, but about every 15 years we'll get a snowstorm that will put 6-8 inches out there in front of Clarkdale.
Well, that's not too bad then.
Yeah, so
they were saying Prescott, we went to the Bead Museum there, and that was a pretty cool museum, but he was saying you get 3-foot snowstorms every once in a while in Prescott. So
yeah, Prescott's higher in elevation.
Okay. So very pretty area. Well, let's take a look through your museum and let's learn a little bit about copper. I'm assuming that the Copper Museum is here because of copper.
Yes, there absolutely, and that's why it's located in this tiny town called Clarkdale. Clarkdale was a massive producer of copper in history. We produced billions of pounds of copper and tens of millions of ounces of silver and gold directly out that window, which is the front of this old former school building, and it was about 7 blocks north of here.
Really?
It used to be this massive copper smelter. Massive means about 2,000 people worked at it every day, and the equipment was just monstrous. The chimneys were 42 stories tall.
Really? They're not there anymore.
They tore the old smelter works down, completely recycled, sent the equipment off to other mining communities. You get it. And what's left are remnants of the smelting industry and the Verde Canyon Railroad, which is an excursion train today.
Oh, okay.
That was the original railroad and footprint of all this production that was going on here.
Now, was it steam? If you take a ride today, is it steam or is
No, it's diesel.
It's diesel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were quite modern here in the early 1900s as the mining community was very wealthy. So therefore we had electricity and water. You get it, all the good stuff. Even telephone or telegraph early on.
Okay, now was this an open pit or was it an underground mine?
Okay, mine was actually in Jerome, which is about 4 miles from here. Most of the mining in Jerome was underground, and there's about 86 miles of tunnels underneath that town currently.
Are you serious?
But non-active today. That all ended in 1950.
Really?
Yeah,
that's quite a while ago.
Yep, metals played out here. The mining was over, and of course, everybody moved on to different jobs around the nation.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. So the mine, so there's basically no more copper here.
That is a true statement. However, Arizona is the 3rd largest producer of copper in the world, just not in this one location.
Okay.
Mainly east of Phoenix. Lots of mining and so on.
Huh. Okay.
So in the museum here, we said, wouldn't it be interesting to bring the story of copper back to the tiny town of Clarkdale, where the story begins in the first place?
Right.
We produced all this copper. We shipped it away. We don't know what happened to it. It just disappeared. People bought it. Industries bought it. But there's a big difference between industry and people. People create art from copper.
Right.
Industry makes electric wires and plumbing tubes, not too much of an exciting story. So this museum is called the Copper Art Museum, and we showcase the story of copper through art. Because out of all the museums you've ever been in, and all those objects you've ever looked at, #1 metal used in all the history is copper.
Wow. Now, I have always said, and I haven't ever said it on my podcast, but I'm going to make a statement now. I would not do an art museum, because art museums, you cannot describe art. You cannot describe what you're looking at, and it would make for a very boring podcast.
Yes, I agree.
I was at this museum like 4 years ago, and I did not think it was an art museum until I just was reading what this thing was, because your displays are so fantastic, and you have such a variety of things that are made from copper, but aren't necessarily what I would consider art, in the same way that you would look at a guy on a horse riding out across the prairie and try to describe that in flowery enough language to be able to have somebody get excited about seeing a man on a horse riding across the prairie.
Right.
So let's go take a look at some of our art.
So Clarkdale's always been known for copper. It was also founded by a guy named Mr. William Clark, and he was America's Copper King. So
America's Copper King.
Yep. So that's why it's here. So in this museum, as we go through, we're going to see about 6 different rooms where there's different types of objects in each room, exhibits. And we're going to see several types of decorative art, applied art, and fine art as we go through. Mainly in utilitarian type objects. Think of kitchenware. Think of military art. Think of drinkware, stuff
now,
like
when
that.
he's saying military art, he's talking helmets, breastplates, sword scabbards, if I remember right.
You can go with that. They're usable, purposeful things, but sometimes decorated finely, so it ends up becoming sort of artsy. We all get it.
Yes.
So we're going to walk down in the museum. We have a simple method. We follow these copper footprints that are on the floor. And that way everybody gets copper sort of in a fashion. So first up, we just talk about what copper is, how it's found in the earth, how people like us found it.
Okay.
Copper was the first metal discovered. It's really easy to find because we can actually trip over a piece of copper laying on the surface of the earth, and you just pick it up and you can tell it's a metal. Copper and gold can form in nuggets on the earth. And just be found naturally.
And now here you've got a nugget that's probably 18 inches long, a foot wide, and it looks basically like a rock, other than it has some green to it.
Yep, copper is always going to have a green or blue-green, blue tone to it, laying on the surface of the earth, and it can be found in metallic hunk or in ore, which is rock.
But the green is a natural oxidization process, right? That's the reason that the Statue of Liberty made out of copper is green.
It's green, absolutely.
Right.
Yep. And here's a nugget here. You can see the green has been polished a little bit, and you can see what's known as the red metal. Copper and gold are the only two metals that have color. All other metals, about 100 of them, are all gray except for these two. And
Really?
if you could see this element chart, you can tell that copper and gold are the metals of color. Those are gases.
Right.
And so on. Most of the planet right there is metal.
Yeah.
Sort of interesting.
Okay, now when you find a piece of copper laying on the surface, can you pick that up and put it in a fire and have it melt out, or is there a lot of extra ore and that type of stuff in it?
Yeah, it'll take a little bit more than just that, but you can find it, and you could put it in a fire, but it won't melt because it takes quite a bit of temperature to melt copper, quite a bit of heat. So you need about 2,400 degrees. So,
Is it that high?
yeah. So, well, 2,000.
Okay.
Fluidity is another
Right.
word. But campfires won't get that hot. However, you can find a natural occurring hunk of copper in the ground, and it might be very hard already. And if you want to soften it, you throw it in a fire and take it out later, and it will be soft enough now to where you can hammer it into a shape like a bowl
Okay.
or utilitarian object. Just from a naturally occurring nugget on the earth, you can pick it up and do that. You're going to have to repeat the process a few times. It's a little more
Right.
than, yeah, you get it.
Okay, and that's the reason why early man used it for so many war implements
Right.
or
Copper was the first metal discovered, gold right along with it, but copper was utilitarian.
right, yeah.
And you can make swords, you can make knives, buttons for your clothes, all that type of stuff that we needed in history.
Whereas gold's a little bit too soft for
Gold's
that.
too rare, it's too soft, and it's a noble metal, so everybody wanted it for those type of things.
Okay.
Yeah. So bronze, you've heard of bronze.
Oh yeah.
Bronze is a man-made metal.
It was also an age.
Yeah, awesome age. You take copper and mix it with tin, you end up with bronze. It's that simple.
Okay, I
Ancient
got a
Egyptians.
question. Where did the tin come from?
Oh, the tin usually comes from, there's sources of tin throughout the world, but England was a big provider of tin in history, but there was also tin found throughout the world, Southwest Asia, amongst with copper as well. These metals can be found.
And is tin a common metal also?
No, tin's not common.
Is it smelted or is it raw?
No, it's smelted.
Okay.
Now you're going to have to find tin in ore, which is that rock, and
Right.
you have to get the tin out of the rock.
Okay.
That takes a campfire.
Is it just only a campfire?
Yes, you can do that with a campfire.
Really?
But copper and iron you cannot melt with a campfire. It's just not enough heat.
Okay, so you got to get.
Yeah, certain metals will melt.
Okay, so when was the Bronze Age?
Oh, about 4,000, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. Give it a range, because each culture was different, each time frame, each part of the world was different. So yes, you can Google it and it'll tell you an exact time frame. But
Right.
you know what? Give 1,000 years on each side of that.
Right.
Common practice is different than inventing.
Right. Okay, so they had copper and then they mixed the tin in and they created a harder metal.
Yes, bronze.
Which is bronze. And they were still able to, did they have to cast bronze or were they able to pound it and mold it?
Yeah, yes, you have to cast bronze
Okay.
into a shape. So you'd have a form,
Right,
and that form would be in the shape of a dagger.
right.
Okay, and you could pour that dagger, and you'd have a dagger instantly as that metal cooled off, or you even quenched it with water.
Right.
With copper, you can't pour it. It's not a metal that pours. So it pours into a usable object, that is. Okay? But you can hammer it into a sword or a dagger if you wish, but you're going to be hammering for hours to make one. Bronze came along, now you can make hundreds in a day.
Right.
Therefore, you got it.
Okay, and
That was the primary advantage of bronze. We could make hundreds of weapons, and then of course we could cast figures. Ancient Egyptians were the ones with these great big art figures, and you can watch one of those old movies and you'll see it.
right. Okay, so they had to learn. So they discover copper. They're able to pound it and mold it, but then they ended up having to design a whole different process for working bronze as far as casting.
Yep.
And building sand and vents and all that stuff. And it's just I'm amazed by the evolution of things because it doesn't just come into being. I mean, it takes people that are pretty brilliant to come up with some of this stuff.
It does. And even though some of this may have happened under happenstance, just happened out of nowhere, it takes a lot of effort. As you get into these newer metals, it's not so easy. You know, as you're mixing them and playing with them, today it's down to molecular stuff. But in history, like cooking in the kitchen, noodles and whatever, butter, and you end up with a meal. But yeah.
Wow.
So these are our first metals discovered up here in this case. Copper and gold are the first two metals discovered. And then silver, tin, lead, iron, and mercury came at a later date. Of course, copper and gold are prehistoric. So far back, no records. But as you get more modern times, and even in the history, you will find out that these have actual dates as far as these other later metals. So today, when we discover a new metal, it gets an actual year on it.
Okay.
Rather than a date range. So
okay.
So another.
And you've got a case here with some lead ingots and some lead figurines and some silver ingots and coinage, because a lot of coinage was made with silver. You've got some copper bullion and some other copper items, some tubing. And then we come on down here to iron and mercury, and it's a nice display. And you've got your element charts and all that kind of stuff in this area. Yep.
And then the other alloy that's predominant would be brass. Everybody's might have been in the service, might have polished brass. Brass is a combination of copper and zinc. Zinc is only about 1,000 years old, very new, so therefore brass is quite new, and so on. Brass is a common hardware metal today.
Right. Yeah. And so it's made with copper and zinc. Okay.
But a common alloy.
Right.
Today's alloys are really unusual. They have many metals mixed in for certain purposes, and they get quite complex. But bronze and brass are your main two alloys and are easy to understand. Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to go into this first room. We call our first room the information about copper room. In here, we talk about where you can find copper in the world. So we have a globe up here, and it shows locations of major ore deposits in the world. So, for instance, North America has lots of copper. Therefore, there's lots of little marks on the map of North America. And so does South America as well. But if you go to a continent like Africa, there might not be as much copper in Africa as like North America.
Okay.
Up next, copper was a metal. If you remember back in high school, you're probably one of the few metals you can actually remember that had the letters that denoted the metal. Like Cu denotes the metal copper.
Okay.
Fe denotes iron, and you all get it. And pretty soon you forget them instantly.
I was going to say, don't ask me what any of them are because I don't remember any of that.
So Cu is derivative from the island of Cyprus. Island of Cyprus is called the island of copper in history. Large copper deposit on the island, hence you get it.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you dive in, cuprum is derived from Cyprus.
Okay.
Copper in English.
Right.
And then also up next, we have a map of the United States, and on there you can see all the copper deposits in the United States. And if you flip through the state book, you can do so by state. And you can say, hey, does Missouri have any copper?
And they
there's
do.
a small amount. Or Minnesota, or Maine.
How come Montana's not on there?
Oh, well, we got to go to the MOs for that. So
there
we go.
I was going to say, and we just did a podcast in Ely, Nevada, and we talked about the mine that's still operating there.
How many in Wyoming?
In Wyoming.
Yeah,
there's
copper in Wyoming. So
I was going to tell you where, but now I can't remember.
Flip through the binder and you can see, and then each state, but we're not going to go down to the tiny deposits.
Right.
Yeah, has to be some sort of commercial thing. Up next are these two symbols that you see. They're called glyphs. That is immediately recognized as the symbol for female and the symbol for male.
Right.
But the untold story is, what else do they represent? And of course, we'll call it the female symbol. It's called the Ankh. That was given to copper about 5,000 years ago by the ancient Egyptians.
Really?
So this stands for copper, this female symbol, but it also stands for the mythical goddess of Venus. That's her hand mirror in mythology or astrology. And then, of course, the planet Venus is represented by that symbol. And the new things today, women, about 700 years ago, the symbol was given to women as well. Medal of beauty, goddess of beauty,
right?
Planet of beauty, and there you go. The feminine medal.
Do you want to explain the male one too?
Yeah, the male one is just as interesting.
I was getting interested here.
So you got your sort of a circle with a spear on an end or an arrow shooting off, and that is the symbol for male. But it originated as a symbol for iron.
Okay.
So all things iron. Planet Mars is also related to this iron symbol. And of course, Mr. Mars, you know, that guy in the mythology, of course, and that was his shield and spear. That's symbolic of that, and so forth. And, well, men as well received that symbol about 700 years ago. This denotes all female and male, no matter what it is, like plants and animals. You can denote the species, or the female species, or gender, I should say, by that symbol. That's the way it is. And of course, that's why men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So we have to talk about that a little bit. So that's right.
I never had a clue as to why those symbols were used.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. So in history, if you went out and looked at a map and there was a copper mine on that map, they would use the symbol, the Ankh, as denoting that copper mine.
And did they use a male symbol for the iron mines?
For the iron.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
And this painting is Botticelli. It's the birth of Venus. And a lot of people want to know why it's here in this small museum. This painting is all about copper and not so much just the beautiful lady on the clamshell.
Right.
So what's going on in that painting, which is in so many art books in the world? Well, she's actually and mythically being blown to shore. The shore is the island of copper in history. Today it's known as Cyprus.
Okay.
So that's what it's about. There's a whole story there. Arizona is the copper state. So there's lots of copper in Arizona. That's sort of our nickname. You've heard it before, the Copper State, the Grand Canyon State. And, well, we've always had the Copper State as a nickname. And the Arizona flag, a lot of people recognize the Arizona flag because of the rays and the blue. The center star on the Arizona flag is a copper star, denoting the industry.
Wow.
Or the natural resource in the state.
Okay.
So Texas has a white star. Y'all get it? I don't know. It must mean purity or something. You get it. I don't know. One of those, right? But Copper State Souvenirs, just like we have Grand Canyon State Souvenirs, you know.
And in the souvenir rack, he's got a lot of copper spoons. He's got a copper license plate, several copper, are those bowls?
Bowls, yeah, souvenirs.
And a flashlight, a couple of candle holders, a super large penny.
Yep.
Just lots of little copper items.
Tokens and souvenir type whatnots. And so on.
And then we've got a bunch of copper smithing tools over here, hammers, anvils, and that kind of stuff. I guess that's for pounding out your copper items.
Yep.
And another nice big rack with copper weaponry. He's got some knives, daggers, nails. The copper nails really kill trees.
If you put enough of them in there, yes.
Okay. I'd always heard that if you wanted to kill a tree, you shoved a copper nail in there, and I thought, where do you get a copper nail? But I see now. What is this? This is a 12th to 14th century helmet with a chainmail face mask.
Yeah, we have we're showcasing the Iron Age here in this small case. We have Iron Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age, and some other things in here. So it sort of showcases that time frame in human evolution.
And what is this helmet up here? It's got a lion on the top.
Yeah, that's a copper helmet in the shape of a lion's head. That would have been worn by a commander of of an army, and not a battalion, but a commander of a corps or something would have wore a helmet like that. This one is made of copper and is not a real helmet.
Oh,
it's just a facsimile of what the iron helmet would have looked like. Made in copper, and then it was sold in museum gift stores, and maybe it was sold to a museum director or to somebody else that had an interest in that sort of stuff. Yeah. So the helmet it's not a reproduction, it's a facsimile.
Okay. And then you've got a lot of specimens of a lot of different types of rocks and...
Yep, these are different ores, and you'll notice predominantly things that are blue or green in color. Those are ores that have a lot of the copper in the ore.
Okay.
And you can extract copper from any one of these stones.
Really?
You just have to do so through heat in old school technology. Today we do it with acids and other technologies. But in history, you and we would have heated up that rock hot enough and would have melted the copper out.
Really?
Today it's electricity.
And he's got some really pretty rocks here. He's got a crystal that I can't pronounce, Cathcanthite crystal, copper flower. It's a bright blue, really, really pretty.
And there's turquoise in here.
And you can get your copper from the turquoise.
Yes.
And from malachite.
Yes, and chrysocolla and azurite. So all these blues and blue greens are those type of minerals.
I didn't realize that copper was that prevalent in all these different stones.
So, yeah, very interesting.
It is. Very.
And copper forms in vein in the earth as well. So here's a piece of copper vein. You can see it in there. And that's
He's got a pretty highly polished rock with, you can see the copper veins just running through it.
Yep.
It's probably 14 inches long and 10, 12 inches wide. And it's just a small sliver, but the copper inlay, it's inlaid. I mean, it's cool.
Yep. It's just,
yeah. Wow.
Right. Here in the museum, we have an old comic book and talks about copper.
The oldest and the newest metal.
And everything that's in the museum, believe it or not, is in this comic book.
Wow. It's a big comic book, too.
So we're going to move to the next room called the Military Art Room.
And this is one of the things I found absolutely most intriguing. I think Linda's going to get her mind blown when she walks in here when we start talking about the trench art.
Yeah. So this is a form of art that was coined during World War I. It's called trench art. You might be watching American Pickers, and the two guys find a piece of it in some garage, and they go crazy, and they tell you, oh, it's a piece of trench art from World War I. Well, here's 750 of them.
It's just a phenomenal display. And the trench art, I don't even know how to describe this stuff. They took the mortar shells.
Yep, artillery shell casings and mortars. And what they did is that after those shells were expended, they would pick them up sometime afterwards.
Right.
And then they would decorate them with floral scenes or souvenir type scenes. Or things like
just
that.
date them,
military unit emblems were on them and whatnot. And you'll have all this. Now, these were decorated and then sent home to loved ones as flower vases. That's why you see so many with flowers.
And when he says decorated, imagine a bullet casing
yes.
But these are super large. They're 16 inches long. They're mortar shells. Yep. And these guys sat in the trenches and they cut intricate designs out of the tops, and then they pounded from the inside or from the outside, to make flowers, to make animals,
they're decorated and in thousands of ways. And,
it's just unimaginable. There's ones up here with a cupid shooting a bow that has been pounded out. There's flowers. There's a horse. Yep. So many different styles.
Names of campaigns, names of cities and geographical regions where somebody might have been stationed at.
Or even just their names with etching, like a wood carving or wood burning that's been done. And they did all this with just their pocket knives, with hammers.
Basic tools. So they took a brass shell casing that was smooth after discharge. And they would fill it full of lead. And now what you've done is you created something you can pound against.
Okay.
And then they picked up almost primitive tools such as a hammer and a punch or a chisel. And they would first draw patterns with some sort of pen or ink or pencil on the shell casing, and then follow that similar to like what you do dot art with a hammer and a punch. And you would hammer around a flower, and you get this relief work on each one that you see here. And that's what's going on.
And a lot of it looks like scroll work, punch work on leather.
Yes, very similar.
But it's done in brass. Okay, now I've got a question because I picked up a piece that's similar to some of these. You've got this one here that several of these that have been narrowed with deep grooves on the inside.
Yep.
Was that done in the trench also?
Yes, that we call that fluting, and they fluted the shell casing, and there'll be all different sizes. Now, if you look closely at this fluted area, you can see the chisel marks of where they chisel.
Okay, I can see that.
Sort of the hammering in there and so on. Now, some guys were quite talented. They could hammer that smoothly and you would not see the hammer marks. But they did.
Well, the guy that's untalented is still way talented.
So you do that kind of work on a smooth shell casing by drawing equal distant vertical lines.
Okay.
And then picking up a chisel and a hammer, and you start tapping away a little bit on each line. Next line, rotating, and maybe after 6 rotations, you have that fluting right there.
And how did they get it so deep with the lead being inside? Did they have to melt the lead out?
Yeah, they didn't have lead in it for the fluting. They only had lead in for this punch work that you see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after the punch work was done, they would heat the shell casing up and dump the lead out. Lead melts at very low temperature,
right?
400 degrees or so.
Yeah. Okay, I never understood how they got the intricate designs that they did, but this stuff is just as detailed as any leather work you could ever see, all except it's done on a round mortar shell casing, and just beautiful.
And done in the field.
Done in the field.
Guys were recuperating. Guys were sent to the rear for rest and relaxation. Guys were convalescing in hospital, recovering from trench foot. They were hammering these out, keeping them busy, and also creating something for loved ones back home.
Wow, look at these ones with the cranes on them. There's so many and so much design. When I was here before, this was my favorite room. I was just totally infatuated.
It's a favorite amongst many.
Oh.
Yeah. And what the untold story in here, the back room story is, where did the metal come from in the first place to create all these trench art pieces? And believe it or not,
it's brass.
Yeah,
it's
these
copper
are brass. Copper and zinc.
Zinc, there we go.
And the copper, believe it or not, originated in the little tiny town of Clarkdale and other small communities throughout the U.S. But Clarkdale was a predominant producer. And we directly shipped copper from this town to France and Great Britain so they could turn that copper into brass, thus shell casings at a later date. And here it is, back in Clarkdale.
Wow.
So you got 360 around the world and back home where it belongs.
Yeah.
This time we're showcasing what happened to it along the way.
Well, on this end.
Yes.
I mean, once it was projectiled, we don't see that end.
No. Yeah, you have to go to a military museum to see more of that story. So, yeah.
Wow. This is just so cool. Wow, that one there's like 3.5 feet tall.
Yep, they can get big. Here's a real big one.
Yes, that one there's another.
This has a name on it. I want you to look at that
Bertha.
name. And you've probably heard of Bertha.
Big Bertha.
There we go, Big Bertha. This was shot from Big Bertha. And here it is now, decorated, fluted, hammered from the inside and out, believe it or not. And this bugger stands right at
3.5, 4 foot tall.
Yeah, right at my hip here. And that's about 10-inch diameter.
And it looks like a Venetian vase.
Yep.
I mean, narrow it. Well, it has the wide base and then comes narrow and
fluted
it on up.
Yeah, impressive.
That is just unbelievable.
Yeah. And this bugger was shot from that ship.
Wow.
Right there. And that is an old battleship from World War I time frame. Actually, a little bit before that, but you understand.
Well, how come they didn't continue this on into World War II and the Korean War and the Vietnam War? You only see World War I. Well, I guess they didn't have trenches the same way, but they were still using mortar shells.
The World War I was a battle of time. They would have these huge battles, and then all of a sudden it was over with, and they would not move an inch for the next 3 months. Then they'd have a huge battle again. It was a supply problem.
Okay.
And you'd have to get resupplied enough to shoot off these hundreds of millions of these things they shot at each other. So the trains were slow back then. There were a lot of horseback pulled wagons back then. World War I, 1916, 18 ish time frame. So there was time. World War II, much speedier. There wasn't as much time to be hammering stuff out.
That makes sense. Okay.
We're going to go into the next room called the art room, but we showcase architecture as well.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll make a quick stop. In the museum, we have a religious art room, and in here you will see things that you might also notice in a church, such as a Catholic church or other faiths and whatnot.
Well, now you got copper plates up here that have hieroglyphs on them.
Yeah. So we'll have different artifacts through here, and the icons to alms platters to holy water holders to
crucifixes
to the
candle holders.
Yep, the copper scroll. We have a quick little video about the copper scroll, and
some pretty good sized depictions of the crucifixion and the Last Supper and some of that kind of stuff.
All in copper.
And then we move on over a little ways further, and there are some really nice big candle holders. Yep. Just beautiful stuff.
That would be like candlesticks that were used for high mass. The bigger ones. The smaller ones are just used for general purposes.
And then you put a nice stained glass window in here just to accentuate it.
Yes.
That's so cool. Yes.
So that's religious art.
Oh, and we didn't talk about the ceiling.
Yeah,
the tin-type ceiling tiles.
Yep, but these are made out of copper, and in history, those old saloon ceilings or mercantile stores that used to have tin ceilings, well, they also made them in copper, but they were very rare made in copper, as copper's quite expensive.
Right. Yeah. And I bet it would be really hard to keep from turning green.
Yeah, we had to clear coat them.
Oh, is that what you did? You cheated?
We cheated. So this is our architectural room, and here you're going to see embellishment to buildings. Think of an old city like San Francisco. It's been around, and you're walking down the street and you see this beautiful green facade.
Right.
Well, believe it or not, that facade is going to be copper. And here are some of those artifacts.
And you got your little cherubs and your gargoyles and that kind of stuff that are all
lines, crestings, dormers, things like that. Even pediments. Made of copper in history. Today, we don't decorate buildings anymore like that.
We don't have craftsmen.
Yep, that's probably one of them.
Really, everybody builds and we have carpenters, but the craftsmen that did the scroll work with the hammers and the chisels and all that kind of stuff are kind of gone.
And this is pricey stuff too,
I'll bet.
Time consuming, and today's houses are expensive enough without any more time consuming.
Then you have lots of platters, vases.
Yeah, this is our art, a little bit of art in our architectural room. We showcase different things made out of copper.
Yes, from platters to bowls. You've got some pretty neat lamps down here.
Yep.
And what kind of lamps are those? This is really interesting because you've got a lamp with a pair of tweezers, a pair of scissors, a bell, and a hook. What were those used for?
Okay, these lamps were called lucernal lamps, and you would have oil in that sort of vessel at the top, and a wick would come out each one of those ports.
Okay.
And a wick
and there's three ports around.
Yeah, and a wick would need to be trimmed every once in a while and maintained, and that's why those tools.
Okay. So you could pull the wick out a little bit more and trim it down, and then snuff it out with the little bell.
Yep, with the little snuffer thing.
Okay, I got it figured out now.
And there's plaques.
It takes a while.
And renditions, different items, whimsical artwork as well, pictures and glasses.
You got a telephone, an old telephone, and a couple sets of bellows.
That telephone is Well, 1940s, but it still works today. If you plug it into the wall, that is.
Well, can you find those anymore? Wow.
So in this other portion of the art and architecture room, we once again feature more artsy type work that would have been highly decorative on artifacts.
Now, when he says highly decorative, you guys can think of a copper vase or a copper plate or a copper whatever, but you don't comprehend the amount of artwork that has been pounded into this, that has been sculpted into it, from pictures of vineyards to pictures of figures to scroll work, inlays, just phenomenal amount of craftsmanship to make the ordinary not so ordinary anymore, and very specialized and very personalized.
And you'll go into many museums in the world and you'll see, or in the United States, and you'll see George Washington or Abraham Lincoln in paint,
right,
on canvas. Well, here's George Washington in copper,
pounded into copper.
That's right.
And a picture of another copper picture with Roman soldiers riding a chariot with their horses in front. Harley Davidsons
in copper,
in copper, all pounded out and molded, and it's just. Every place you turn around and look, what are these boxes right here?
These are old boxes from Holland, or from the 1670s, 1800s, and that's how you actually stored your tobacco in history.
Okay, I was gonna say cigar boxes.
And of course,
boxes.
you would roll your own cigar or whatever you had, and your tobacco was stored in that, and that's almost a watertight seal.
Really?
It's very tight. And in history, made of copper because this is what we had available. Lots of copper.
Okay, and we're looking at
And
boxes that are kind of oval shaped or oblong shaped, that are probably 10 inches long, inch and a half thick. They've got a lid on them, and all of the lids are very ornate with
every type of artwork you could think of.
but it looked like the stuff that you get when you buy those little vibrating etchers for signing your name on stuff. And
this type of work would commonly be called like scrimshaw.
Scrimshaw, yeah.
And you will see it in whales, teeth and bone and whatnot. But here it is, using awl, and you can inscribe onto the brass and the copper, and then come up with decoration.
And all handwork.
Yep.
And
awl is a scratching tool.
Right.
Yep. And so on. Other things, gargoyles.
Oh yeah.
You'll see those as downspouts you might think of an old medieval church in Europe, or a Gothic church. They always had stone gargoyles.
Right.
And of course, stone gargoyles weigh hundreds of pounds. So to make it more efficient, you make your gargoyle out of copper. Now you have 5 pounds.
Right.
Now you don't need the superstructure.
And you get to watch the change from copper to green.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
This is a dormer. Dormers are high on a roof on a house or a building.
With a window in the middle.
Yep. Sometimes roofs are made out of copper, guttering and whatnot. Well, here's a dormer, and this came off the Carnegie Mansion in New York City.
Oh, really?
Mr. Carnegie had all copper roofs on his property and so forth. Here's one of the dormers from that house.
I think a lot of roofs were copper back in the day, weren't they? A lot of the churches had copper around the high circular castle, whatever. I don't know what they call those things, but they're domes. And
even courthouses, a lot of times you go through a capital town or whatever county, and you'll see a copper dome.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to replace copper like you have to replace shingles, and if you don't want to get up there very often, build it out of copper. A copper roof will last 100 years. 200 years or more.
And they're starting to come back. I've noticed that copper's really becoming kind of popular. We've got a restaurant in our hometown that they did all of their tabletops with copper and their counter in copper and some of that kind of stuff. But I've noticed that there's a lot of houses that are now using copper, high-end houses or businesses that are using copper for roofing and stuff again.
Yeah, copper has a beautiful color. Folks like it in their kitchens.
I've seen a lot of it there too.
And then it's an antibacterial metal as well.
Oh, is it?
Today, people like copper because, COVID and whatnot. Copper kills bacteria, like COVID. It'll take about 2 hours after it's been touched with somebody that's been infected or whatever. But all bacteria will die on a copper surface in about 2 hours' time.
Really?
So you can't transmit as fast.
But you don't want to coat your copper with any...
no, you don't want to coat it.
It has to be the raw
So
copper.
you want your finger to get green like mine
So
did.
older doorknobs, like the ones you see in this high school that are made out of brass, are pretty much germ-free until somebody touches one of them. And then a 2-hour cycle.
And so the copper even carries over into the brass?
In the brass and bronze.
And bronze. Yeah. Wow.
So antibacterial.
I did not well, I knew that copper, a lot of people use it in bracelets and stuff for arthritis and other purposes that way, but I did not realize the antimicrobial benefits.
So we have some plaques in this area, and of course we have a copy of the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
And
she's only about 8 foot tall, so
we we got a lot of folks through from New Jersey and New York, and that had no idea that the Statue of Liberty was made out of copper. So
really,
we got to let them know in Arizona.
Wow. Well, they just redid a whole lot of the Statue of Liberty, and they had to oxidize it, didn't it? In order to turn it back to green, because otherwise the copper would have showed.
Right. Yeah.
And nobody was expecting a bright colored
portions.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I remember reading about that.
You might see a brand new copper roof that way, and then they'll treat it with an acid, and it makes it turn green rather quick.
Okay.
Yeah, that green is an oxide mentioned earlier.
Right.
And it forms naturally on copper. Some electrical switches and items. This is a local guy who had a lovely electrical collection, as he was a former electrical engineer. And, sometimes guys collect just about everything.
And he's got old fuses and outlets and light bulbs, all kinds of things.
Sockets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is a nice big display. It's probably 12 feet long and 8 foot tall, full of, well, you've even got an old electric toaster and iron from. Yeah.
And so in the museum, we have about 6,500 objects on display. The museum is about 10,000 square foot in size. And we're now entering the next room, which is the kitchen room. And you probably figured it out. Cookware and kitchenware, but not common cookware, but highly decorative cookware that you might see in a castle or a palace, but also a few pieces that are quite, a little more common that you would see.
Well, you've got a couple plain Jane pots over here that are only about 2.5 feet in diameter and about 3 foot tall. I mean, there's nothing extraordinary about that.
That is very true.
That's what, a 50-gallon copper pan?
That is almost 50 gallons. If you were to fill that up with water, it'd weigh about 480 pounds or something like that.
Well, it's a good thing they got handles on the side.
And it was really... And those huge pots were used for clam bakes and lobster boils, things like that.
Okay.
In history. Today, we're still making large pans, but they're out of stainless steel.
Right.
Stainless steel is much more reasonable. Copper's quite expensive.
Question. Since copper keeps the bacteria away, if they cooked in copper pans, would that help with that as well?
It would on the exterior of the pan, but not the interior.
Not the interior?
Copper is almost always tin-lined on the inside.
Okay.
And why did they do that?
Well, copper is a reactionary metal, so it will react with your food. Say, for instance, you cook pasta. You want to cook your pasta in a tin-lined pan where you don't have this copper reaction. If the pasta was to sit in a copper pan for several days, it might get a flavoring that tastes a little bit like copper.
Okay.
Whereas tin on the inside of a copper pan will circumvent that, so you won't get any flavoring from tin.
Okay.
So,
now they used to. I know that some acids and stuff would leach the metal and give you problems. I don't know if that was pewter or lead, or they made plates with several different types of metals, and I know people would end up ingesting that heavy metal. because of the acids in the food. Tin doesn't do that?
Tin does not. Tin is an inert metal.
Okay.
Okay, and then there's reactive metals, and there's poisonous metals, and there's toxic metals. And if you leave something in an unlined copper pan long enough, you'll get that flavoring.
Okay.
Even though the human body needs copper, it doesn't need too much copper. And that's what would happen. You get a toxicity. Sort of like drinking alcohol. You get an alcohol toxicity. It won't kill you unless you drink way too much. But you get it. And then there's lead and mercury. Those are poisonous metals.
Right.
Those, and so forth. Copper is used in life processes. Goes in your body, ingesting from foods primarily. Goes in the body. It's used in life processes and washes out normally.
Okay.
Just like vitamin C and iron and zinc. And then lead will go into the human body and get stuck in there. And
Right.
it can't get out, therefore it causes a poisonous reaction. And of course you have to see a doctor. But you get it.
Right.
Different types of metals.
Okay.
Yeah. So in here, you mentioned the size. These big, huge monster pots and pans, those were used in restaurants and taverns. And in history, we had hospitals in history.
Right.
We had taverns in history. And they would use these big pans because you'd cook an entire day's worth of food and then serve from the pan throughout the entire day.
And this whole wall is very large pans. We've got roaster pans that probably hold
2 foot across.
10 gallons, maybe even 15 gallons. Lots of just big pans, big carrying type pans. And you've got some like coffee.
Yep, for a fireplace, those would hang in the fireplace.
Coffee pans and tea kettles that are probably 5-gallon tea kettles.
Yep, those are bath kettles for heating up your hot water
Then
for a bathtub.
Okay.
That's why they're so large.
Okay, I just figured maybe it was for a hospital and giving everybody tea in England just before you fed them their crumpets.
So in the kitchen room, we also have lots of food molds. For aspects and custards and breads, puddings, we can even call them jellos today if we want.
You've got one that's shaped like a fish. You've got one shaped like a pig. Lots of them that are just ornamental eggs in a nest.
Geometrics and figurals and other types of food molds. A lot of bundt cake molds. That's
Okay. Well. And then we've got some
miniatures and child's toys type things, always out of copper as well.
Wow.
In history. And one of the primary reasons you see so much copper in cookware in history is you cooked on copper until about the year 1860, and then a newfangled thing called cast iron came out.
Enter Mr. Griswold.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. Now today we've changed again. It went through aluminum and now we're up to stainless steel. Or maybe we're even into plastics today. I don't know.
It seems like copper's kind of become the anti-stick pan craze in the last couple of years. I don't know if that's real copper.
That's usually it's not real copper, but it's copper look.
Copper look, yeah.
People like the color. But and they put a really nice Teflon type of
is that what it is?
Or ceramic surface today, and so on. So once again, copper fry pans to cookware to you name it, baking, bakeware.
Okay, what is this? I'm looking at a item that has a lid on it on one end, kind of like a filler bottle or a pop bottle lid. It is about 14 inches long, 5 inches wide, 1.5 inches high, and then it's got a whole series of little square blocks that almost look like it could be for ice cubes or something, but it doesn't look like it's an ice cube holder.
So
what is it?
So you're right. It is an ice cube holder.
Is it really?
This is to make ice cubes. But we got to think back a little bit, and Clarkdale's a perfect town. This town had an ice plant, and the ice plant would make blocks of ice.
Right.
They were delivered by the Iceman, and it went to everybody's house. And of course, if you wanted to make ice cubes out of that ice block that was delivered to your house, you needed this device.
Okay, I'm beginning to get an idea.
So you
kerosene in the end.
Nope, you want to fill this full of hot water.
Hot water, okay.
And then you take this device, setting it upside down, so the cubes are facing down, onto your block of ice, and you come back in 5 minutes. This tray has sunk into the block of ice, cutting out the squares or the cubes.
Right.
And then all you have to do
Is break them
break
off.
the cubes out.
Oh.
And the next step is the Margarita glass.
Wow. Okay, now this is way cool. And because
And
copper is so heat conductive,
Yep.
then it allowed the heat to be able to come into the little fins that are all shaped like squares.
Yep. Yep.
That's
So
cool.
And I
this-
wonder how many times, if you had to replace the water every set, or if it would work 2 or 3 sets.
You might get 2 out of it.
Yeah. And you get what, 12 or 15 ice cubes each set?
It looks like it. Yeah.
Sounds like a good job for somebody.
This is our, yes.
all
is
day
our-
long.
This is our what's it.
What's it?
Does it go upside down or right side up?
Yeah, you can put it either way, but if you were to make ice cubes, it
Right,
would
it would go that way.
go. Yeah. So it's a neat piece. Kitchen stove, copper embellishments.
Oh.
This is a beautiful stove.
This stove is probably 8 foot long and has all the copper handles for turning the gas on, turning the gas off. Very decorative, and then it's enamel on the face, right?
Right.
And then of course, your cook surface is stainless with regular gas type.
Yep.
I wouldn't mind having that.
Oh, I wouldn't mind having that either. That's beautiful.
That's made in France, that stove, and
It's a modern.
it's a modern stove. But
right.
It's made to look old.
Yep. Maurice.
Maurice is no longer in business, but you've heard of, or maybe you've heard of stoves like La Cornue.
Nope.
La Cornue is another high-end French company that makes stoves. It's on par.
Okay.
And once again, even more copper food molds and copper plates and copper trays and copper salt holders and copper ladles and spoons and you just name it. Everything was made of copper up until about 1800-ish, and then we changed. So copper and brass were predominant in kitchens throughout all of history.
Wow. And beautiful pieces. Copper strainers. He named just about everything, but if you can think of it, it's here. And then we have the stainless steel set that everybody's seen with the copper bottoms on the bottom.
Yep, that's very true. We had to have those. Those are a revereware. And everybody tells me that they polished the bottoms of those pans when they were children. And Mom gave them that chore. And they have a copper bottom and then, of course, a stainless steel side.
I think I've still got 1 or 2 of those at my house.
Yeah, they don't wear out.
They're forever. And then you've got copper salt shakers, pepper shakers, coffee grinders,
Cookie cutters.
Wow. It just kind of keeps going on, and that's all utilitarian stuff.
Yeah. Even a few years back, Martha Stewart made, her company made copper cookie cutters. And
Okay.
They were popular, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
And they were popular probably 120 years
Yep,
ago.
yeah, they made them out of copper years ago too. So the showcases you see in this museum were all hand done, and they're custom made for the museum. So if you were to visit this museum, you will see custom cases that you won't find in any other museum. And we actually used iron window frames to make the showcases. These iron window frames came out of the copper smelter here in Clarkdale, Arizona.
Okay.
And we recovered those windows. We fabricated them into display cases. So now you can look into these windows, display cases, and you can see the copper that originally, more than likely, came from towns like Clarkdale, Arizona, copper-producing towns. This is what happened to it.
Well, everything is displayed so beautifully here in this museum. It's just, I think you could spend a full day just looking at the ornamentation on some of these copper, just in this room, on some of the copper items, and it's just a fantastic museum.
And on the table here, you see just a medley of copper items. Just recently, a guy donated 150 of these copper cooking items to the museum. On January, and in the end of February, he's going to donate 44 dish barrel boxes of copper cookware to the museum. So 44 dish barrels, probably about half of this room. It's about a half a truckload.
You're going to have to build another museum.
We need more space.
Now, do you take donations if somebody has a really odd piece or something like that?
We can take donations. We can even work with an individual on pricing or shipping to ship things in, Yep. We can accept all donations. We're a regular nonprofit organization like every museum you've been in.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there a lot of other copper museums in the country?
No, we're the only one.
The only one.
However, there are copper museums in the world, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we come on out here and we get into...
We're back into the hallway, and we're just going to do a walk and go here. We have some copper gong, copper bells, and brass
musical instruments.
Musical instruments.
Holy smokes, what is that trumpet up there? It had to take 2 guys to hold that. That thing must be 6 foot long.
That's a big one.
Wow.
Yeah. And we just talked about other copper items you see. Here's paintings of in museums.
Okay.
If you ever walk into a museum now, you're going to look at a painting and probably curse the guy in Clarkdale. Me. Now you're going to be looking at a painting and saying, "Look, there's a copper item. There's a copper item in the painting." And as you get it, in history,
everything,
it was everywhere. So when you go through the Metropolitan now, you're going to be looking for copper items rather than whatever.
And then you got a brass diving helmet from the early 1900s, I'm thinking, is when they were using those, when they were all in the unisuit with the air pump down and they had the big round helmet on. And then you've got a big brass propeller off of the Titanic?
No, not quite.
Okay.
But that one was made of bronze as well.
Oh, was it?
Just to let you know. Yeah, they're made of bronze today even. And those big, huge container ships, that propeller is 30 feet across.
Wow.
So some of the biggest ones are like 30 feet across and so on. So here we have a model of this old ship that's still in commission today. It's called Old Ironsides. Sitting out in Boston.
Okay.
And we're looking at it right now, this model, and well, I don't see any iron on it. Do you?
I see copper.
I see copper. That's right. We should rename it Old Copper Sides.
Yeah.
However, no. The Ironsides is because the cannonballs would bounce off. However, if you want to keep the algae and the biofouling off the bottom of your boat, you put copper on the bottom of it. Remember? Copper's toxic metal. It keeps snails, worms, and other things off the bottom.
Really?
So all of these ships in history...
The USS Constitution, the Santa Maria, the Victory,
even battleships.
Wow.
Now it's up to paint. And even this ship had the copper on the bottom, but copper paint. And there it is right there.
Okay.
You might recognize that one.
The Titanic, yep.
Yeah, right.
And that was all copper on the bottom too.
Copper paint on the bottom. And what's interesting about this Titanic, or photo, is Mr. Clark's nephew.
Oh, really?
Was on the Titanic, and of course he died on the Titanic, and he was up there in first class with the rest of those guys.
Wow.
Mr. Clark and his wife had return tickets on the Titanic, but they never got to use them for some reason.
Huh. I wonder why that would be.
Yeah.
And then you've got a lot of copper and brass nozzles from firefighting, and that's...
And then
warmers and heaters. I was going to say those look like popcorn poppers.
They do, but they're bed warmers.
But they're bed warmers, exactly. You used to put hot coals in those and then put them in your bed at night and warm up your bed before you crawled in, and hope they maybe stayed warm.
Before central heat.
Right, exactly. It was probably a little bit more dangerous than a brick, but...
Yes. You may have heard of samovars. That's sort of an artifact that served hot water or coffee, tea.
Okay.
Sort of like an urn, hot water urn. And samovar would commonly be out of Russia or that region.
Okay.
So forth,
very ornamental again.
Yeah. And these would have been in most homes. And if you probably watched that movie, Hunt for Red October.
Right.
Oh, the lead actor there. I'm not good at those guys, but
I'm not
if you
either.
Look back when he's in the captain's quarters, you'll see a samovar sitting in the back.
Okay.
Got to have one on board the Red October,
Right.
We're getting done here pretty close. We're into another room called the Drinkware Room. And in here, it's holding a liquid.
Okay.
So we used copper in history because it did not rust. And of course, here it is. Once again, we didn't have any other metals to make things from. Aluminum? Okay, so some guy found aluminum back in the 1400s and discovered it, or whatever year they discovered it. Doesn't mean they used it in 1401.
Right.
Okay, so it took hundreds of years for this to progress.
Well, it's also a really brittle metal.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. But copper was your primary metal in history. Wouldn't rust away.
okay, and we've got all kinds of
Water
holding things
wine,
from
beer.
probably a 25-gallon water wine holding container. These all have lids on them.
Yeah,
a lot of them have spouts.
Yep. This is your water vessel, commonly called a cistern.
Okay.
And that would hold your water in your kitchen. And you would scoop from this vessel and then prepare dinner or whatnot.
Okay. And
So that's a water tower, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've got several of those that are probably 25,
Yeah.
35-gallon containers. You've got a lot of these ones that have water spouts with, are these like for
Those are
holy
your
water?
sinks.
Or, those are sinks?
Yep.
Okay.
Sinks.
So that had a little spout on it and you could wash your hands or whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's pretty
And these
cool.
date quite a ways back there. We're looking at items that are from the 1600s, 15, 16, 17, 1800s in this room.
Okay.
Very
now,
early.
I'm noticing a rim about halfway up. Does that mean that these were in two separate pieces and then they were
Yes.
soldered together?
Yes.
And what, they soldered them with lead?
It could have been, but we've known lead to be poisonous for a long time. It just keeps resurfacing for some reason. So they probably used tin.
Okay. And they just heated up the tin and they sweated it like you do a plumbing pipe?
Yes.
Okay. And what did they use for their torches?
Oh, they would have had different devices back in the day. They would heat up a brick, a solid chunk of copper.
Okay.
And then they would use that as a
heating device to...
device, and they would solder with that.
Okay.
So you had this block of red hot copper, if you want to call it that.
Right.
And at
Like the old
1500 degrees.
furnace heated soldering
that would heat
irons.
up the joint, and you'd sweat a joint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
beer steins, beer tankards, vessels that held liquids. The reason they're so big is because you wouldn't have to run down to the barrel in the basement to get a beer all the time. You would fill up a pitcher. Yeah,
Well, and these pitchers they're what, probably 3 or 4 gallon pitchers?
Yep, and they're servers, and you would serve from that.
Okay.
So the server would get one and then be good for an hour.
Okay. And back in the day, the beers and stuff, from what I understand, was what everybody drank because the waters weren't good enough to drink.
Right.
So you had to drink something that was a little bit fermented and processed. Yeah.
Yep. Here's some ale measures. And once again, we're at a sort of a brewery distillery. They would use these, and you would come as a purchaser of beer, and you would tell them, I want 3 gallons.
They take, and he's got a series of these pitchers up here that go from probably a pint all the way on up to what, probably 5 gallons. And yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's about 10 or 12 of them up here that are in all the different increments. So you can go in and buy a pint or a gallon or whatever you wanted.
Yep.
That is interesting.
Yep.
It's cool.
And the beer steins, here's some more highly decorated, very intricate. Where would a beer stein like that be used? Well, in a tavern, or there might have been a beer stein of like a burgermeister or lead county official. You get it.
Right. Yeah, and these look very much like the ceramic or the whatever beer steins that you see that are all ornamented and have designs on them. These things are the same way. There's
just pictures of copper.
People pouring pitchers and hanging out in gardens and lions walking and all kinds of things.
Grapes.
Wow.
And more liquid room. So we got lots of things that deal with liquids and beer and that. Wine chillers in history.
Okay.
A wine chiller would chill your bottle of wine or champagne, whatever you might have. These vessels are sort of oval so that you could put 2 bottles in there.
Right.
And then you'd have it filled with ice. Well, ice is common in the world. you store it in the summertime, just like we did here in the United States. You could store it in a cool spot in the house, and it would last for a couple months anyway. And you'd break off some ice from a block.
Right.
Put it in there.
People need to realize that they made ice in the winter when the rivers or the lakes froze over. They go on out. Whole communities would go out and cut enough ice for the winter. They would put it inside of a ice house that was usually 2 foot wide walls that had sawdust in them. Mm-hmm. And it would keep the ice all year long. And your ice delivery man, I guess, would sit there with a hot pan and make ice cubes for you so that you could have your cold drink in the middle of summer.
Yes. Yep. And then we have some glassware in here. And
you've got a vase in here that looks like a goose.
Oh yeah.
It's got a little lid on it, and the pitcher is in the shape of a goose with the wings all hammered out and a lot of different scroll work on it. It's kind of a cute little one.
That took a lot of thought.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it did.
Yep. Now we have some glass in this room, and the reason we have these different colored glass artifacts in this room is because in order to make the blue colored glass, you have to have copper.
Oh, really?
Copper is actually staining the glass blue.
Okay.
So if we add copper to glass, boom, you got it. If you add iron to glass, it turns glass green. However, if iron in nature turns rocks red. Think of the red rocks of Sedona.
Right.
Well, just opposite here.
When you're mixing it with glass, it turns green.
And then, of course, some folks all know that if you take gold and mix it with glass, it turns the glass red. Now, that's
I'm not one of those folks,
yeah.
So I'm glad you just told me that.
So that is definitely in history that we used gold to turn glass red. If you Google that today, you're like, no, that guy in the museum's crazy. But today we use selenium to turn glass red.
Okay.
So you got to go down and start researching further, and you'll find where it says in history. But it's not going to be on the first page of Google.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, glass, all glass, the colors originate from metals.
Okay. And I had no clue.
And that's pretty a common thing in the world. And everything that's light blue in color on this planet, almost everything, even man-made, that color is coming from the metal copper.
Even like fabric dyes.
Yes.
And some of the
Yep.
Wow.
So if you've got a light blue colored shirt or tattoo or your phone cover there is sort of light blue, that's copper's making it blue. Yeah.
And now what makes the green glass?
Oh, in this case, that's uranium. You've probably heard of uranium.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and it turns glass sort of a yellow-green color.
Okay.
And so on.
Wow.
And the dark blue, well, here's another one. You might have heard of that one too. You've heard of cobalt blue, the element.
Right.
There's cobalt blue, the glass.
Okay.
In order to get that dark blue.
The dark blue.
Metal cobalt.
Okay.
So it's sort of a fun story.
I had no idea that the glasses were colored that way. Mm-hmm. And then you've got a bunch of molds
These
in
are
here.
chocolate forms.
Chocolate forms.
We're making
I like chocolate.
We're making figural chocolate in like a chocolate shop.
Right.
Especially in Europe, where you have your old world Santa Claus, or you might have an old world gingerbread house.
You got a New World Santa Claus here riding a motorcycle.
Yeah, he's pretty new, I guess. That car.
And some of the old Santa Clauses with the pointed hats and
they call them Saint Nick.
And the knights riding the horses.
Yeah. So just chocolate is very high in copper content.
Chocolate is high in copper content.
It's a natural food that you eat every day, and you're going to get plenty of copper when you eat.
Now,
chocolate.
why do you get? They put it in as an additive, or it's in the plant itself when it grows.
It's in the bean.
It's in the bean.
Yeah.
So do they fertilize with copper in the chocolate?
Well, they would.
The cocoa or the beans.
Well, they don't have to, but you will still get copper in the bean because copper occurs naturally in soil. Now, if you want to amend your soil, say it needs more nitrogen, well, it might need more copper too. And then you would add it as an additive.
Okay.
Yeah, copper sulfate you add to soil and so forth. And it's used commonly in vineyards as for pesticide control as well.
And copper's one of the essential minerals that you need for your body.
Human body required.
We're buying chocolate before we leave.
Naturally occurring. And this is an old public high school building. Of course, we have some old leather sweaters and cheerleader outfits and whatnot in here.
And your yearbook was called The Alchemist.
Yep.
Wow.
Old diplomas. There's a copper diploma up there.
Really?
Yeah. They actually gave out copper diplomas in this town.
Really?
That's pretty cool.
And we were privileged around here.
Were you?
I guess they were.
Not
too many towns got a copper.
Well, a lot of these old mining towns, you know, the mines would really develop the towns with electricity and extra amenities and all that kind of stuff to keep their employees and keep the good employees.
Yep. And that's exactly what Clarkdale is. We're an old model town. We were completely built out by the United Verde Copper Company. And today, the remnants, we have 387 homes and buildings on the National Register in this tiny town.
Really?
Most towns in this nation will have about 4 homes on the National Register.
Right.
So you can see the value there. Yeah. So we have one last room,
okay,
and we saved it for last.
We saved it for last.
The Distillery and Winery Room.
Oh.
We couldn't have done it without this room. So you have some old world stills in here and artifacts that were used in wineries and distilleries and breweries, jugs and tankards once again, and these big vessels that carried grapes and whatnot that were all used in those processes to make
and
good things.
What, you could carry probably 55, 65 pounds of grapes in each one of those grape carriers?
Yeah.
They don't have I guess the handles are down low.
They got straps.
So straps,
it went on your back like a backpack.
Okay.
And then you filled it with grapes, and of course...
Kind of threw them over your shoulder as you were
You
picking
or I
them.
would have hauled them to the grape squishing and dumped them into the squisher, and then somebody else would have squashed them.
Okay.
Or squeezed
That makes
them,
sense.
Whatever. Yeah.
So they were put on like a backpack, but they were all made out of copper, and again, really ornamentally carved and designed.
And these are actually fine art pieces. These here only sat around and looked pretty in the house.
Oh, okay.
Whereas you would, an actual grape pod would have been made out of wicker or wood and used in the field. These were decorative. They would have sat next to paintings.
Okay.
And so forth.
Okay, I want to talk about this. I'm looking at a saddle stand with a pack saddle on it that has these 2 tanks that are probably 4.5 feet long. They look almost missile-like as far as taper up to the point and then back on down, oblong, round. And horses were designed to carry these. Is that for the moonshine coming out of the woods, or is that just the way that they carried the wine after it was processed, or what is their purpose?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I bet Carla's been asked this before many, many times what that is. It's another what's it? Yep, exactly as described. However, that was used in the field to fertilize the field, and you would carry a substance in those copper tanks called copper sulfate. And you would use that in your field.
Okay, now was there a way to disperse it?
Yeah,
okay, so it had a pressurized spray nozzle on the front.
Yeah, the packs would have been on the back of a donkey or burro or whatnot, and 2 guys would have been on each side, and it would have had wands, and the spray would have been coming out of the wands, and you would spray your vineyard.
Okay.
And they do it today. We just use tractors.
Right. Okay.
But
yeah, I didn't have any idea that that's what they were doing is spraying with that. Yeah.
And I'm looking at this panel of soil amendment. You can see how they add copper sulfate to the soil, but also as a pesticide control as well.
Okay. So it's a natural pesticide.
Fungicide too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Many plants have a tendency to develop fungus. Well, to stop that, you spray it with copper sulfate, especially grapes.
Okay.
Now, that's why when you turn a bottle of wine around, it'll say it contains sulfites. That's one of the reasons.
Okay.
You use copper sulfate in wine to purify it as well, to get rid of the bacteria and other things.
Okay. And then you have this still.
Yes.
Holy smokes. I was talking about the big barrels, copper barrels that would hold 50 gallons over there. This one's like 250 gallons.
So this is a cognac still. It's made in France. Processed white wine, ended up becoming cognac, and of course stored in barrels and sold on the market and so forth. But this is out of France, about 1850 is your range on this. Made of copper, brass, and bronze. Once again, copper doesn't rust, therefore, boom, you use it. Copper heats up very well. Also, all of distilling requires heat, and the transference of heat through to start the liquid to boil was part of the mash or whatever you're boiling. And
this one looks like it's riveted.
Yep, we got some rivets going on. We got some.
Did they solder in between the rivets? Do you know?
No, yeah, they did not solder in between those rivets. However, if you've ever seen one of those old lanterns, the wick lanterns, they use that wick on the inside of this joint to seal it, and then they rivet it. And they would use like a bitumen or a sort of black tar substance on that wick to seal it, and you're sealed.
Okay, that makes sense.
Super. So a giant cognac still.
You've got a couple of wood barrels up there that I'm sure held wine or
held something good.
Something. Yeah. And then you've got some implements of harvesting and knives.
Yep, for the vineyard tools.
Yeah. And those are pretty destructive looking tools.
Yeah. And
big blades with long handles like axes, or I guess what you think of Renaissance type tools that were used for other purposes than vineyard harvesting.
Yep. So in history, if you wanted to equip an army quickly, you found farmers, because farmers had all the tools that had nice sharp blades on them for farm work. So your farmers were hauled off into warfare, and they would bring their own tools with.
Okay.
These axes that you see here, these blades and things. These, in the vineyard, cut stumps or cut logs out of, branches out of the way and things like that. Making barrel staves.
Right.
You get it.
Okay.
You have to have sharp tools.
Well, cool. You said this was our last room?
Well, we have a gigantic beer kettle outside the front door there.
I think we already saw that on our way in. That's a gigantic beer kettle. What?
Yeah, well, I got to give you some statistics, because I know you're itching.
The comprehension doesn't get there without the statistics.
So that bugger is 12 foot in diameter, 15 feet tall. It produced 7,000 six-packs of beer at a time. And that's of course, just enough for my girlfriend and I.
Oh, okay. For the rest of your life. And
she's the heavy drinker too, not me.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that thing's huge.
Yep, that weighs about 5,400 pounds of copper. We can also leave it outside. Nobody's going to roll it off. So,
really? Yeah. You don't chain it down?
No, nobody's rolling that bugger off.
Okay.
It's a little too big.
Okay. Well, you guys have a website.
Yes, copperartmuseum.com.
Copperartmuseum.com. You guys have Facebook page and Instagram and all that stuff too? Same thing, Copper Art Museum?
Yeah, just type in Copper Art Museum, and anywhere in a web search, whatever, you come to the museum here and get us. And our phone numbers and all that listing stuff is online.
And your price to get in?
Yeah, we're about $875, $975, depending on seniors and adults and whatnot. Very low for children. We realize that there's lots of mothers out there with 2 or 3 kids. So children's rate is very low, $1.25 to $3.50, dependent.
Okay.
That way moms and dads can bring their family rather than like, oh my gosh, it's $100.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is so much to see here, so much history here. This is just unbelievable. And I'm just as impressed my second time through as I was my first.
Yeah. And you can take all the photos you wish, and you can even touch the artifacts. We know that people learn by touching.
Right.
And you're not going to hurt a piece of copper by touching it. We just
that
ask that you don't drop it.
Right.
But yeah, you can actually feel.
Right.
And get that.
And the
learning.
Yeah. That is so cool. Well, I so appreciate your time, Drake, spending it with me here and talking to us about your museum. I finish out my podcast by saying the world is full of wonder, and sometimes it's fun to see it from somebody else's perspective. Everybody needs to get out, see things, enjoy it, and have an absolutely wonder-filled day.
All the roll and go, where am I? I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?